So it's lovely to see you this morning. Just by way of introduction, my name's Sara Demaine, and I'm a psychological therapist with the PD Network, and I work in the DBT team. And I'm just going to thank Sarah from Communications. Thank you so much for being with me today to help out. my lack of technology skills are legendary. So thank you for that. I know Joe Ramsden's been hosting these for the past few weeks. This is the fourth and the final session today. Okay, so this webinar was described as focusing upon self-harm, because that's what DBT, those of you who know about DBT, aims to help with. But it might not be exactly what you might be expecting, because I'm not going to be presenting a toolkit of skills to assist with self-harm today, because I've seen the presentations that we've had so far, and Helen Stocks gave us some brilliant techniques rooted in polyvagal theory in the second session that will help you in supporting people who use self-harm as a way to cope with their distress. So many of those things that she described are mirrored in DBT, and so we use them in DBT too. So I didn't want to repeat that today. So if you're wanting a toolkit and skills, specific skills, really do revisit her. I really recommend you revisit her seminar for those ideas. They're really, really accessible. So in thinking about my kind of pitch, if you like, to you today, I've thought a lot about the discussions that we've been having in the DBT team and the conversations I've been having with patients. I'm going to call people patients rather than service users for the needs of this discussion. So I've been thinking about the conversations that I've been having with patients over the phone, via Zoom, and in our virtual groups. And I guess what I want to share today is something that I hope is attuned to you, to your work, and will feel supportive to you. So I want to talk about a strategy that will help you with bringing down emotional arousal that often leads then to self-harm and risk-taking for folk. And it will help you help people when they have urges and strong impulses to hurt themselves. So what I'm bringing today is a strategy that will help you in helping people. And as I move through the slides, please do feel free to ask questions or chip in or use the chat, and Sarah will monitor that. It'll help me feel, well, a bit less alone, I think, is probably the situation. Validation as strategy. Never underestimate the power of this skill. Okay, validation. So you might be thinking, wow, slight disappointment here. I was perhaps expecting something a little bit more theoretical or sophisticated or technical, something you maybe haven't heard about before. After all, as a DBT woman, she'll have something I really need. Well, I do. This strategy is, we use in the DB team, and we've been using it so much in recent times, particularly over the last few months. And it underpins so much of the work that we've been doing before we've perhaps even moved to specific skills. And we use it with each other. And you'll be using it too, maybe without realizing. And the reason I'm wanting to kind of go on about it today is because it really works. You can get a really, really long way in helping people in a single session with validation, and I call it the less is more skill. It's simple but effective. So why does validation work? Why does it work? Because it's about meeting people where they're really at. Okay. It's about meeting people where they're at in their particular moment, not yours, not ours, their moment. And that's the secret, because it helps you become and remain attuned to that person, with where they're at that particular moment. And if you can get that far, if you can stay attuned, not just listen, to stay attuned, your capacity to help radically increases. You're on it. You're really on it. Let's talk about what it is first. Okay, so validation communicates to a person. It communicates to a person that their behaviour makes sense. and it's understandable in the current context. And that's the current context that they're in. Okay. So that's from Marshall Linehan, who developed DBT. But also another perspective is that validation is understanding the world from the person's perspective. So it's recognizing that the person's perspective is not wrong, but it's understandable. So their perspective is not wrong. Now, how they cope with that perspective, how they cope with that moment, might actually be wrong at times. It might be really risky, it might be illegal, it might be a number of other things, and that's what we're trying to help with. So we're not judging how the coping happens, it's the perspective and their view. And we're communicating that the emotion response and their behaviour does make sense. It does make sense. So my increased stress levels, my anxiety in speaking to you today now makes sense. I've never done a webinar. There are lots of people here I don't know. My technical skills are poor, and I'm worried something might go wrong. There might be judgments, and speaking in front of an audience can be exposing. So my stuff makes sense. So my occasional tremble or actual mistake makes sense as a result of my anxiety in this context. But getting anxious about making my lunch later doesn't make as much sense. Unless, of course, I've got somebody really important coming for lunch, I've got the Queen or somebody else, then my anxiety might rise, because that's then appropriate to the context. Is that helping? I hope so. So why do we need to validate? I think this is fairly simple, really, isn't it? Because the people we work with have had the most invalidating experiences, and they continue to do so. They've experienced trauma and abuse of many kinds, significant loss, deprivation, and again, that might still be continuing for them. So what we mean by that is, I guess people have had the most invalidating experiences. They've had they have not grown up with anyone, carers, recognising or acknowledging their emotions or their distress. And their pervasive experience might be to have had their experience dismissed, actually. So it's not just ignored, dismissed. So stop crying, or you're so stupid for doing that. And also their private experience, therefore, has been actively dismissed. And that means they have grown up and grown up to cope the way they do as a result of that. So this is core to DBT and a number of other psychological theories. So validation helps. How does it help? It helps to bring down negative emotional arousal when a person's too distressed to talk or think about anything else. So negative is here. Okay, negative is key here. We don't want to bring all emotional arousal down. If you're a Leeds United fan, you won't want your emotional arousal bringing down because you're pleased and chuffed that you've moved up. But I guess if you're kind of feeling intensely distressed and risk-taking is around, then we want to try and bring down that negative emotional arousal. We want to try and understand a person's experience. Okay. That's key here. I guess one of the things that I kind of hold on to more and more is this sense of drop the change agenda when you're trying to validate. Drop the change agenda. And what you might need to do there is really literally sit on your hands. When you're listening on that call, particularly the calls that we're having to do at the moment, drop the change agenda. You need to listen, and you need to bite your lip sometimes if you need to. And it's letting go of thinking about change in this particular moment. The idea when you're listening is to really try and get it. So we're trying to drop the change agenda. However, we do pick it up later. So we don't just leave people hanging. The idea is that we pick it up later. So to acknowledge, I guess at point 3, to help people learn to validate themselves. The idea here is that really we're trying to acknowledge and accept, help people acknowledge and accept what they can do well. I guess that's part of treatment, isn't it? To be able to do without us, that they don't need to always have us to validate them or other people. The idea is that they can think about what they can do well and how well they can cope at times, or how well they can tolerate struggle when it's impossible to change the situation that a person is in. Yeah, number 4, we've got 6 points here. To give people feedback to help them. to try and help them with, I guess we're providing a mirror, aren't we, to enable to people eventually to be able to think about what's happening for them, perhaps not always in that moment, but later on. And it's also about helping to strengthen the therapeutic relationship. If you know that you think somebody else has got you, is kind of understood you, then that strengthens the relationship and is helpful in the ongoing work. And importantly, it's about helping people cope with change and to make progress. I guess that's ultimately what we're kind of trying to achieve, aren't we? We want people to help them cope and to be able to make progress. We're in it together. So what it's not is pointing out that a response was functional in the past but not now. So it might be that it's tempting, isn't it, to perhaps say to somebody, gosh, you managed that really well last week. What's gone wrong now? That was then, this is now. It's also not about making a person feel better by saying they're okay or doing well when they say and they're feeling really stupid or fed up and unable to cope. So validation then is not correction or comparison. It's not coaching or cheerleading. This is really helpful in my learning, really, with validation. It's not coaching or cheerleading. Coaching is believing in a person's capacity or ability to do stuff. And coaching helps you move towards the change stuff. But validation is saying and staying in the moment. So validation is not necessary. It's not saying that you necessarily agree with the person's behaviour, but rather that you understand. So this is really important. It's about not necessarily agreeing with the behaviour, but it's about connecting and communicating that you understand. Because validation functions as reinforcement. So what you validate, you'll hopefully see more of. So we don't want to be validating invalid behaviour. So for example, situation I had once was where a person was in a shop trying to buy something, queuing at the counter. Somebody barges in and queue jumps basically and gets served before them. This person gets upset, angry, gets really cross, shouts, leaves the shop, taking a shelf of bread with them on the way out because they were so angry. So what we would aim to do in that situation would be to validate the anger or the upset or the hurt at not getting served and having waited and somebody else queue jumping. But we don't want to be validating the clearing of the shelf, because that's the behaviour that stops you getting into the shop again, or means that you get removed from situations. So validation strategies, I'm sharing with you today validation strategies and levels of validation that we use in DBT, but these are applicable across a number of different models, obviously particularly CBT, of which DBT is a derivation. But I guess the kinds of strategies that we would start with, I guess, is staying awake. Now, Linehan talks about staying awake, and I think it's not to be underestimated. Yes, really, staying awake is about staying alert. That's what it means. It's recognizing your tiredness when you're in it. If you've had 20 similar calls the same day, you will be tired. So recognizing that's really important, but staying awake, being available is really important. As you then begin to reflect accurately a person's situation and what was happening for them. So the situation of the man in the shop, you went into the shop, somebody queue jumped, you shouted, you left the shop, clearing it on the way out. You're not judging it, you're not suggesting why or what, or anything else apart from just reflecting accurately what was happening as that person had that experience. The next thing you might want to do is think about mind reading. I guess often folk assume that we can read their minds, because if they feel and look and feel so intensely distressed, how could we not get it? Well, actually, we don't get it unless we can hear. So what we're trying to do is perhaps have a guess or begin to kind of use the information that we're gathering to give people options or a menu of options that might be helpful. So you must have felt fed up, hurt, angry. You're trying to help with a possible menu of options to choose from. You're perhaps trying to get into the shoes of the person you're with. And then validating in terms of the past. I guess that's because, I guess that's where we might talk about formulation here, mightn't we? But I guess we're trying to help with understanding why a person's experience makes certain situations or having certain emotions really tough. So, man in the shop, we know you experienced feeling ignored a lot when you were small. It's no surprise then that you can so easily feel this way now in other situations. It's the present context. We don't like being ignored, it hurts. So, sorry, yes, the validating in the present, in terms of the present context, is also about, yeah, acknowledging that it's not nice when you go into a shop and people ignore you, or somebody queue jumps. That's not pleasant. And then radical genuineness. We talk about this in DBT. Radical genuineness needs to be handled with care because it's about responding on a level, just the way you would with any person that had the same experience as the person you're with. So it's trying not to treat the person as fragile. And it's not always concealing our human responses. And it's about responding authentically, but you've still got your practitioner jacket on. Okay, so what we're saying here is, and this is really important when there's perhaps high risk behaviours going on, you might be wanting to show a little bit more of your concern. And I guess that's the radical bit. It's actually saying, wow, crikey, what was happening there? What were you thinking? So I'm talking about this with a sense of caution, because unless you're comfortable, it can backfire. But it's about moving up levels when you are needing to really help contain somebody. It's showing your response. It's showing your facial expression. So we want to be able to show some concern, I guess, and some, I guess this is where facial expression is really important. And it's actually, I guess, the way we're working at the moment by phone often is, it may be that you have to really up your tone of voice, your volume, perhaps your intonation. So because we don't do neutral face, do we, when someone's just said, I've assaulted somebody, we might be going, ooh, crikey, wow, what happened? So the radical genuineness is about responding on a level in the same way that you might with anyone else experiencing that experience. But just handle it with care. So in thinking about radical genuineness, I guess you just, yeah, you need to know your person, and you need to remember that you're not responding as you, well, you are obviously, but you're responding actually as a practitioner still with your jacket on. Okay, so how we validate. How do we do all this? Bringing it together. We just stop. Remember, stop dropping the change agenda. Just stop. And notice any of your own pulls to want to do. So we may, without knowing, try and leap to providing or offering solutions. Just try and resist this. Really try and resist this. Because our difficulty in stopping makes sense too. Because we want to help people. We want to find solutions to problems. We want to help people when they're upset. But in those initial moments, initial minutes perhaps, I would strongly encourage you to stop. And somebody I've really found really helpful in thinking about this is an American DBT therapist called Charles Swenson. And I really recommend you looking him up because he's so easy to use, he's so accessible. And he really validates how important this is to just drop the change agenda. You listen, really listen. And that's, again, literally sit on your hands if you need to. I have done that. This is the showing up bit. This is the moment when you really have to resist multitasking, especially while we're working the way we are. It's tempting to check phones, remain on a keyboard while you're taking a call, or look at notes that you're thinking about what you've got to do later. And it's hard not to do that. But I guess if we can really turn our minds literally to the phone call or the person they're listening, it will make such a difference. And this is the beginning of you feeling more attuned. And I guess the next step is to continue to allow then for some emotional expression, however hard it is to hear. So this could be someone's narrative that you keep hearing every time they call or every time you speak. It could be the yes, but it could be a number of things. But your task at that moment is to allow for that expression and to begin to acknowledge this is really tough. And again, notice your tone of voice and maybe your body language too. So reflect back what you're hearing. You're telling me things have been really rubbish. It's been really by. Am I right? Help me get this right, or help me understand. So try and, I guess what you're doing here is a bit of a crime scene investigation type stuff, isn't it? You're kind of gathering your information as much as you can to really help you with getting to where the person might be. But only say what you think you can hear. People have a great radar for knowing when it's not genuine. You know, I've said to somebody once, you know, without intention, I think I understand. And actually, they say, you can't understand, you don't understand. And I think that's important. If we really don't understand, we can say, yeah, I'm not getting this. Can you help me more? Help me understand. We will get rumbled. So, yeah, and then I guess we're describing, that's the reflecting bit, I guess, isn't it? Describe how it makes sense in terms of the person's experience. You were being ignored. Your anger makes absolute sense. That must have been awful when that happened. So, yeah, you're kind of really using a describe. You're staying with the facts. So we're trying to move away from opinion. We're trying to stay with facts to enable the person to be able to think with you. What you might need to do though, emotional expression is good. Of course it is. That's what we want to help us understand. But I guess what we also want to make sure is, in thinking about risk and self-harm, is that we don't want people to unravel too greatly. And it may be that if this begins to happen, so somebody begins to get increasingly distressed, and I guess it's kind of building, in your sense of being with them or hearing them, is that this is beginning to feel really hard, and up the intensity of your affirmation. So you might need to be actually really kind of pulling up a little bit, which is to, sorry, I've been distracted by a contact request on this call. Wow, this has been really tough today. I'm so getting what's happened. You're letting them know, I'm hearing this, okay, I am really so hearing this. And then we need to move to contain quite quickly. Okay, I'm hearing this, it's really hard, it's really upsetting, you are so furious. But look, we need to, I'm worried that you maybe start to feel much worse. When we start to spend longer at this point, it can feel really hard, and we know that you can feel more upset than we would want you to be. So I'm hearing it, I'm getting it, let's begin to hold a little bit. So we're trying to help people with not unraveling so that it becomes actually really unhelpful and increases the impulse or risk to a more serious level. Okay, so by following those steps, as arousal rate slows, some capacity for thinking can be possible. And it actually is at this point, you may have a number of possible options. It might be a number of things. It might be problem solving. So you're actually in a position where actually you can think about getting a. You may want to do a kind of chain analysis of the current problem or the trigger to the distress. Commonly we would do that in DBT. That may or may not be possible. And when we say chain analysis, what was happening beforehand? What were the antecedents? What were the triggers? What was happening? Just to help understand what it was that was happening for you. You might implement some of the kind of action which you've previously worked on as part of your work or your care plan, or it might be reminding somebody of a skill they can use or a technique you've been working on. It might be that they need to access or further support. Or it may be nothing else is needed, that validation is simply enough. It may be that nothing else is needed, that validation is simply enough. Because, hold on to the fact that validation is a powerful reinforcer and a tool in itself. So although it can underpin and help with bringing arousal down and enable you to move on to something like something more connected to the change agenda, it can also be simply enough to help somebody with bringing their distress down and maybe being able to feel that they can cope and move on, move forward. Whatever that looks like. That might be simply getting up out of a chair and getting out of the room to do something else. Alongside all of this, because you're doing it already, You're doing it already. Use your existing therapeutic skills, what you know works with your person and your particular model, your particular way of working with somebody. Use the relationship where you have one. Really use the relationship where you have one. And I say where you have one because I know that so many of us are taking calls now from people we don't know and we might not have. And this is where I think validation is even more important, because when you don't know somebody, you really have to gather as much information as you can. And I think validation really helps with that. Remain congruent, non-judgmental, empathic. That sounds like, does that sound a bit harsh? Maybe it could. But I guess what we're trying to do is remain congruent, remain attuned, remain consistent in your kind of approach with somebody. So, and the non-judgmental part is about taking away assumptions or just listening and staying with the facts and describing. And as part of the process, you might want to kind of review treatment ideas and goals. Again, it's something about helping people remind them, this is part of what we've been looking at. This is hard. We anticipated this is hard because this is what we started to kind of think about together. So I'm not surprised to hear that you're struggling with this. It's new stuff. It's hard when we do new stuff. We're stepping outside the comfort zone. It's feeling hard and it's risky. And a word about validation, just hold on to the fact that changing our behaviour is hard. How we've had to change our behaviours as practitioners, as folk in this pandemic. We're having to do things very differently. But also hold on to the times when you've tried to do something different yourself, whether you've tried to, learn a new skill or change your routine in some way, get to the gym more often or do something different. It's hard. Until something becomes habitual, it's hard. So our task does remain, doesn't it, to try and help people persist. We need to validate that the fact that the task and what we're asking them to do can feel hard, that struggling is normal, and that doubting our capacity to achieve change absolutely makes sense. I think that my doubting my capacity to do technology is hard. It makes sense, and I keep experiencing it. But I guess what we do is we try and persist, trying to support people in the change. We have to persist with them, don't we? So moving towards the last few slides, if we may. Key points for today, really. Stop, listen, really listen. Validate the valid, and hold on to the fact that validation is a powerful reinforcer. Okay. I've got a video. We're going to see if it works, aren't we, Sarah? So it's just a short video that I hope might be helpful.
It's just, there's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
I've kind of come to the end of what I had to share with you this morning. If this hasn't taught you anything new, then that is really validating in itself, because you're just carrying on doing a brilliant job, all of you. So if much of this is familiar, as I hope it is and should be, then and it's helped you with some of how you do that, then that's lovely. But I also think when something reaffirms what you're doing or helps you think about, I am doing that already, that's in itself validating. If there's anything anybody would like more information on or would want to follow up, then do give me a call or an email on the network. I'm happy to follow any of this up and help if I can. Okay, thank you. So yeah, you've had to do a lot of this in inpatient services, and okay. Lovely, thank you. Super. Those are lovely comments. Thank you for that. It's that's really nice to hear. Thank you. So look, check out It's Not About the Nail. It makes sense when you hear it and see it. And thank you. Someone's going to show it to their partner. I love it. It's so familiar, isn't it, to a lot of us? Okay, so thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for your time this morning. Enjoy the rest of, well, enjoy your weekend when you get to it, and have a good rest of the day. Okay. Will you give me a wave for those I can see? Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.